Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Ayin Vov Amud Aleph, starting with Ayin Hey Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. The Gemara continues to discuss Erev Chatzeros. First case is talking about when two of the Chatzeros want to join with each other, and the second one, which each one want to make a separate, independent Erev Chatzeros. Says the Gemara with the first case, Omar Rav Nachman, Omar Rabbe Bar Avua Omar Rav. Beis Chatzeros v'gimel batim b'neim. You have a situation where you have two Chatzeros, Chatzer number 1 and Chatzer number 2, and between the two Chatzeros is bayis A, B, and C. Now each one of these batim are opened up to each other, and they're also then opened up, the outer ones, to the Chatzer. So it says over here, when they want to make an Erev Chatzeros to combine two of the Chatzeros together, this one in Chatzer number 1 goes through the bayis A and puts his pas in bayis B. And Chatzer number 2, they take the pas and they bring it through bayis C and put it in bayis B. On top of Ayin Vov Amud Aleph, Ze Naase Bayis Shar Leze, Veze Naase Bayis Shar Leze. It says that each Chatzer made the first house that was adjacent to it into a base Shar. And Soy Havolei Bayis Shemenichim Boy Eruv. And the middle one is the bayis where they place the Eruv. So it comes out like this, that both outer batim, bayis A and bayis C, are base shar for each of the Chatzeros, and there you don't need a pas, you don't need to put your Erev Chatzeros there. And since they put the pas from the Chatzer, they each one put their pas in the second bayis B, then once it's its own, it's already put pas within its bayis, that bayis is not required to put its own pas because the batim already placed their pas inside its bayis. And therefore, the whole purpose of putting the pas is either, one opinion says, making a kinyan together or having a dira together. And here, once it's placed in that person's bayis, he doesn't have to put his own pas because it's put in his bayis. So it states over here again, it says Ze Nase Beis Shar Leze, Ze Nase Beis Shar Leze, indicating that no one has to put pas in those outer batim. And Emsoi Havolei Beis Bayis Shemenichim Boy Eruv, since the middle one is where they place the Eruv, therefore they do not have to put in their own pas inside it because the two Chatzeros placed the pas inside of its middle bayis. So that's the case when it comes to 3 batim between two Chatzeros that want to join two Chatzeros together. When each Chatzer wants to place the pas in the middle bayis, so it makes the outer batim a base shar, and the middle bayis is where the pas is placed. So they're combining the two Chatzeros that way, and the middle bayis doesn't have to place the pas, and also the outer batim do not have to place the pas because they're now serving as a base shar. Says the Gemara, Bodik Lahu Rachavo L'Rabban. Rachavo, the sage named Rachavo, he wanted to check the acumen of the sages by asking the following scenario. Beis Chatzeros v'Beis Batim Benim. You have two Chatzeros, and in between the two Chatzeros is two Batim. So you have Chatzer 1 and Chatzer 2, and in between them is bayis A and bayis B. Says the Gemara, Ze bo derech ze v'nosan eruvoy bezeh. Bezeh nosan bo derech ze v'nosan eruv bezeh. Each Chatzer, now here we're talking about when each one wants to make an independent Erev Chatzeros for its own Chatzer. So the people in the Chatzer number 1, they went through bayis A and they placed the pas in bayis B. And Chatzer number 2 did the opposite. They went through bayis B and they placed their pas in bayis A. So here we have a situation when the first bayis that is adjacent to each Chatzer is being used as a base shar, and the other bias that is further away from each chotzer, that's used as the bias itself. So he's asking, Kani Eruv or Loi, is this going to acquire an Eruv for each chotzer or not? Now, again, if we consider it to be a base shar, then it's not going to be valid. And if it's going to be a bias, so then what you have a problem also, because then you have in between the bias where you place the pas in, you have another house, a base shar in between. And that itself is not a base shar, because to the other one it's a bias. So then you cannot go ahead and carry between the bias where you put the pas in to the chotzer. So the Gemara is asking, what would be the din? Monav Shoch answers the Chum to Rachavo. Ibei Shar Mashvis. If you're going to then equate these batim as a Bei Shar, that means to each one it was a Bei Shar for itself to get to the outer bias, then that's going to be a problem, because you can't put your pas in Bei Shar. It states, Hanoisin es Eruv Bei Shar Achsadro Umir Peses. Eino Eruv is not a valid Eruv. That's on the one hand. Ibayis mashvis lane. If you want to then make it so that it's a bias where they placed their pas, so that's also a problem, because to the other one it's also the other bias is a bias to him, and therefore kometaltil lebayis de lo ma'arev. You're carrying from the bias where you place the pas through the other bias into the chotzer, and that's invalid. Asks Rachva on the Chachamim's answer, Maishno miderova. He challenges and says, what's the difference between that case that we had just presented to the case of Rava? Rava said the following: Do Omar Rava, Omru loy shnayim tsei va'arev aleinu. A person, two people rather, said to one person, each one made him a shaliach to make for them an Eruv Techumim. So each one wanted to make an independent Eruv Techumim using the same Shaliach. It states over here, La'echod Eruv alav mi ba'id yoim, uv'loi Eruv alav ben hashmoshos. One of them, he made the Eruv mi ba'id yom, and the other one, he made the Eruv ben hashmoshos. Now, ben hashmoshos is a zman that is suffik. It's suffik yoim and it's suffik laila. And when it comes to Eruv Techumim, the halach is that you have to place your Eruv in the makoim to be kind of shvisa already mi ba'od yoim. So the one who then placed the Eruv mi ba'od yom, that's simple. That's certainly going to be valid. Here we have a situation where the other one he placed the Eruv for is ben hashmoshois. So we have to then take on that's also mi ba'od yom. So we're taking on that ben hashmoshois is then defined in this scenario as as mi ba'od yom, as Erev Shabbos, to make the Eruv valid. Now it goes on to say, however, Zeh she'eruv alav mi ba'od yom, the one who placed for the Mishaleach his Erev Tchumim mi ba'od yom, nechal Eruv ben hashmoshes, he ate the Eruv ben hashmoshes. So we know another halacha when it comes to Eruv Tchumim, that you have to also maintain that the Eruv is there during the entire Ben Hashmoshes, before while it's still going to be the entrance to Shabbos. So it states over here that the one who placed the Eruv for him mi ba'od yom the day before an Erev Shabbos, so he ate the Eruv Ben Hashmoshes. So we have to take on that. Therefore, Ben Hashmoshes is after Chashecha, after Tzeis HaKoichovim, Friday night. And the one who then placed the Eruv ben hashmoshes, he ate it mishech hashecha. So what we're saying over here is as follows. We're saying that since ben hashmoshes really is a suffik yom, suffik laila, we're going lekula on both ways. On the one hand, we're saying ben hashmoshes is yoim. On the other hand, we're saying Ben Hashmoshes is Laila. So we're being Mekil when it comes to then the Inni of Erev Techumin and determining what is Ben Hashmoshes. Shneim Kanu Erev. According to Rav, they're both Kanu Erev because we're being Mekil again in our definition of Ben Hashmoshes. We're allowing one to use Ben Hashmoshes to be Yoim and the other one to be Ben Hashmoshes as Laila. So ask the Gemara, how is this then, Rachva asks, different than our scenario? Why is our scenario not going to allow us to be mekil when it comes to the case of batim? Say that one bias is a base shar for one of them, and the other one is the bias. And for the other one, that one that is a bias for the first one is a base shar, and the other one is going to be a bias for him. Ask the Gemara, Hochi Hashta. Now, is this a good comparison? Hasam Safek Yoy Mama Safek Lelia Lo Minkra Milsa. There, in the case of Rava, it's a Safek Yoim Safek Laila. It's not Nikr, it's not recognizable. For example, you can say the first half of Ben Hashmosha will determine to be Yoim, and the second half of Ben Hashmosha is to be Laila. It's not recognizable. So we can go ahead and be Mekil on both counts. Aval, Hocha, but in regards to over here, when it comes to then choosing when it's a bias or it's a base shar, either legabe the high bias, legabe the high bias. If you're going to say to one it's a bias, then you have to also be consistent and say to the other one it's a bias. Legabe the high base shar, legabe the high nami base shar. If you're going to say to one it's a base shar, they have to say the other one's a base shar. You can't mix and match. Say one it's a bias and the other one it's a base shar. Then it will be a big joke, the whole inyan of the Erev Chatzeros over here. And therefore that's not going to be a way of being mekil, because that's going to be a possibility that will then cause the whole institution of Erev Chatzeros to be one big joke. Hadron Aloch Hadar. The seventh parak opens up in regards to then two Chatzeros that are side by side but have a mechitza in between them. So if it's a complete mechitza throughout the entire area from one side to the other side, so then they're split up, the two chatzeros, and each one can only make an independent erev chatzeros. They cannot enjoin and make one erev chatzeros to combine the two chatzeros. However, the Mishnah teaches us that in certain circumstances, that mechitza will enable us to then also make an erev chatzeros between the two chatzeros. Says the Mishnah, chaloin shebein beis chatzeros. If you have a chaloin that is in the mechitza, that means you have a hollowed out area in the mechitza between the two chatzeros, that is arbo al arbo, that has the dimensions of at least arbo al arbo tfochim, betoich asar, which is also within 10 tfochim of the ground, then ma'arvin shnayim. The Mishnah says you can go ahead and each one can make their independent erev chatzeros, but the chiddush is but if they want, they can make one combined erev chatzeros, combining the two chatzeros. The Mishnah goes on to say, midalid al dalid oy lemala me'asar. If it's less than the dimensions of 4 by 4 tfachim, or it's higher than asar tfachim, ma'arvin shnayim be'marvin echad. Then the only eitzah is that each one can only make their own independent erev chatzeros, but they cannot combine the two chatzeros. Says the Gemara, Leima Tnan Stama Kirabi Shimon ben Gamliel. Let us suggest that our Mishnah is taught Stama like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Now Rabbi Shimon Gamliel learns that when it comes to the concept of lavud, he says, is less than 4 tfachim. So therefore the Gemara is suggesting the fact that the chaloin has to be dalid al dalid, mashma, that if it's less than that, is not going to be a valid chaloin because of lavud. So let's suggest that the stama tana of our Mishnah is after Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Less than dalit tfachim is considered to be closed. Halacha Moshe Messina is lavud. Afilu teim rabbanan. Says the Gemara, no, you don't have to say that our Mishnah specifically goes according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. You can even say like the Rabbanan who hold that lavud is less than 3 tfachim. If it's less than 3 tefachim, then we consider the area to be closed. The Mishnah states, but the chalon is dalid al dalid tefachim. Why not just say that it's less than 3 tefachim? It's 3 tefachim, then it's going to be a valid chalon. Less than 3 tefachim is lavud. Says the Gemara, no, because ad kan loy pligi rabban al Rabbi Shimon Gamliel ela le'inyan levudim. They're machlokes in regards to lavud. If it's less than 4 according to the Rabbanon, or less than Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, or less than 3 according to the Rabbanon. Aval le'inyan pischa. Afilu rabbanon moide. But in regards to making a pesach, the chalon that we're talking about, that has to be dalad al dalad. Even the chachamim agree that it must be the least dalad al dalad. Why? The iika dalad al dalad, the chashiv. V'iloi loy chashiv. Because only when it's at least dalad al dalad tfachim, then it has chashivus. Less than that, even the Chacham agree that's not chashuv, and therefore cannot be used to combine the two chatzeros. The Gemara now says, when regards to the Mishnah that repeats itself, it seems to be redundant. It says in the beginning of the Mishnah, the Reisha, that the chalon must be daled al dal tfachim, at least asar tfachim from the ground, within asar tfachim from the ground. Then it will be a valid chalon between the two chatzeros to enjoin the two to make one erev chatzeros combining the two. However, the Mishnah goes on to say in the Sefer that if it's not daled al daled, or if it is above asar tefachim on the ground, then you cannot go ahead and make one erev chatzeros to enjoin the two. Each one has to make it separate erev chatzeros. Ask the Gemara Pshita. That's straightforward. Certainly, if the Reisha said that it has to be daled al daled within asar tefachim, then we know that if it's not, then it's not going to be valid. Kivan da Omar daled al daled b'toich asara mimela ana yadana depachos midaled l'mala midaled loy. So the Gemara is asking, why does the Mishnah repeat itself in the Sefer? Answers the Gemara, Hokamash malon, taimo dekule lemala me'asara. Aval miktsosoi b'toich asara, ma'arvin shnayim v'imrotzu ma'arvin echon. The reason over here the Mishnah states the Sefer is to teach you that if the entire thing is above asara tfachim from the ground, then it's going to be invalid to then combine the two chatzeros. But if a little bit is within asar tfachim, then it's already enough to combine the two. The Gemara now says, Tanina loho deton rabbanon. Our Mishnah taught that which the sages had taught in a brisa. Kuloi lamalo me'asara. The brisa says that if it's entirely above asar tfachim, the chalon that we're talking about, entirely above asar tfachim, u'miktzoso b'toich. Sorry, not atar. That means that most of it, let's say 95%, is above asar tefachim, but 5% is still within asar tefachim. Then it goes on to say in this brisa, or kulo b'toich asara u'miktzos l'mal asar, or 95% is within asar tefachim and 5% is outside, above asar tefachim. Ma'arvin shnayim v'imrotzu ma'arvin echad. Here it states in the Brisa, you can ma'arev two independent erev chatzeros for each chatzor, or you can also, if you choose, to make one erev chatzeros combining the two chatzeros. Now the Gemara asks, Hashto kula l'mala ma'asara. Now that you have said in the Brisa that if the entire, meaning 95% is above the asar tfachim, u'miktzasa b'toich asara, and 5% is within asar tfachim, it's valid. Then amris ma'arvin, shnai v'imrotzu ma'arvin echad. It's valid to even combine the two chatzeros. Then kula b'toich asor mitzot l'mala me'asori miboy. Then why does the Brisa have to go on to say that if 95% is within asar tefachim and 5% is above asar tefachim, it's valid? Certainly it's valid, because we said even if it's 95% out and 5% in, it's going to be valid. Answers the Gemara, zu ve'ein sorich zu ketoni. The Brisa is teaching a method that sometimes is taught in Brisas and Mishnayos, that's called zu ve'ein sarich zu, that the real chiddush is in the first statement, and the second statement is not a chiddush, it's less, but it substantiates the first statement, and therefore that's how it's taught over here. But in Nechanami, it's not a greater chiddush. The greater chiddush is in the first statement, the original statement, and the second one is not a chiddush, it's zu ve'ein sarich zu lomar zu kitani.